It was a warm Thursday evening when I decided to come home early from my business trip. The meeting had wrapped up sooner than expected, and I wanted to surprise Barb. I had a small bouquet of flowers in one hand and a bottle of her favorite wine in the other. As I pulled into the driveway, I felt a surge of excitement. I imagined the smile on her face when she saw me. I quietly unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I placed the flowers and wine on the kitchen counter and made my way upstairs, careful not to make a sound. Our bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I could see the soft glow of the bedside lamp spilling into the hallway. My heart skipped a beat as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. There, tangled in the sheets of our bed, was my wife, Barb, with another man. They were both sound asleep, completely unaware of my presence. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare. "Barb," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But she didn't stir. Neither of them did. I stood there, frozen, watching them breathe, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to throw them out of my house, but a strange calm washed over me instead. I turned and walked out of the room, down the stairs, and into the garage. Among my tools was a pair of handcuffs I had bought as a joke years ago. I grabbed them and headed back upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Back in the bedroom, I approached the bed. Barb was lying on her back, her arm draped over the man's chest. With trembling hands, I gently fastened one cuff around her wrist and the other to the headboard. She mumbled something in her sleep but didn't wake. I moved to the other side of the bed and did the same to the man. With both of them securely handcuffed, I stepped back and took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but I felt a cold, focused determination. I picked up the bedside lamp and held it above Barb's head. "Wake up, Barb," I said, my voice steady but filled with pain. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked confused. Then she saw the handcuffs and the lamp in my hand. Her eyes widened in fear. "Jerry, what are you doing?" she gasped, trying to pull her hand free. I didn't answer. I turned to the man. "Wake up," I said, louder this time. He groaned and opened his eyes, looking around in confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to sit up but failing because of the handcuffs. "I'm Jerry," I said coldly. "Barb's husband." The man's face turned pale. "Oh God," he muttered. "Jerry, please," Barb pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "Really? Because it looks like my wife is in bed with another man." "Jerry, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Please, let's talk about this." I shook my head, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing me. "There's nothing to talk about, Barb. You made your choice. Now you have to face the consequences." I walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside was my revolver, a .35 Magnum. I took it out and turned to face them. Barb's eyes widened in terror. "Jerry, no," she whispered. "Please, don't do this." I ignored her and looked at the man. "What's your name?" "Bob," he said, his voice shaking. "Bob Simmons." "Well, Bob," I said, "we're going to play a little game." Barb started to cry harder. "Jerry, please, don't do this. I'm begging you." I took a deep breath and looked at them, feeling this strange sense of calm. "This is the only way I can make you understand the pain you've caused me." As I began to explain the rules of the game, the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about making them feel the fear and helplessness I felt. This was about taking control of a situation that had ripped my life apart. And so, with my heart heavy and my mind set, I prepared to deliver the consequences of their betrayal. Barb's scream pierced the silence of the night. She jolted awake, her eyes wide with terror as she realized her wrist was handcuffed to the headboard. Next to her, Bob Simmons groaned, and tried to sit up, only to find his wrist also bound. He yanked at the handcuff and cried out in pain as the metal dug into his skin. "Jerry, what are you doing?" Barb's voice was high-pitched and shaky, tears streaming down her face. I stood at the foot of the bed, revolver in hand, my heart pounding. "Good morning," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Did you two sleep well?" "Jerry, oh my God, it's not what it looks like," Barb pleaded, her voice breaking. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Not what it looks like, because it looks like my wife is in bed with another man." Bob, his face pale, tried to speak. "Jerry, listen, we can talk about this. Just put the gun down." I turned my gaze to him with a look of pure contempt. "Talk about what, Bob? About how you've been screwing my wife? How you've destroyed everything I believed in?" Bob swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the revolver in my hand. "It was a mistake, man. It just happened. Please, don't do anything rash." "A mistake?" I echoed, my voice rising. "A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt. This is a betrayal." Barb sobbed, her tears soaking the pillow. "Jerry, please, put the gun down. We can work through this. I still love you." I felt a surge of anger and heartbreak. "Work through this? You were in bed with another man, Barb. How do you expect us to work through that?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "It meant nothing. It was a moment of weakness. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it." I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Fix it? How do you fix something like this, Barb? You broke my trust. You broke my heart." Bob, still pulling at the handcuff, tried to reason with me. "Jerry, listen. You don't need to do this. You don't want to go to jail over this." I looked at him, my eyes cold. "Jail? You think I'm worried about jail right now? You should be worried about what I'm going to do to you." I opened the cylinder of the revolver and showed them the single bullet. Their eyes widened in fear. "This is a .35 Magnum cartridge," I explained. "If this hits you, it will create a wound that will make you bleed out. We're going to play a little game of Russian roulette." Barb's sobs turned into desperate cries. "No, Jerry, please. Don't do this. I'm begging you." I ignored her and spun the cylinder, snapping it back into place. "Let's start with you, Bob," I said, pointing the gun at him. Bob's face turned ashen, and he closed his eyes. "Please, don't." I pulled the trigger. Snap. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Bob let out a shuddering breath, his relief palpable. "Looks like you got lucky," I said coldly. Then I turned the gun on Barb. "Your turn, my dear." Barb's eyes were wide with terror, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Jerry, please. I love you. Don't do this." "Do you think God will forgive you?" I asked, cocking the gun. "Do you think you deserve mercy?" She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Snap. The hammer fell on an empty chamber again. I smiled bitterly. "Looks like fate is on your side today." I lowered the gun, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. They were terrified, just as I had been terrified when I walked into this room. But their fear didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. It only made me feel emptier. "Why, Barb?" I asked quietly, my voice breaking. "Why did you do this to us?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know, Jerry. I was lonely. I made a horrible mistake. Please, let's talk about this." I shook my head, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing me. "There's nothing left to talk about, Barb. You made your choice. Now you have to live with the consequences." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. What was I going to do now? How could I move forward from this? But one thing was clear. Our marriage was over. There was no going back from this. The room was heavy with tension, the kind that wraps around your throat and makes it hard to breathe. Barb and Bob lay there, handcuffed to the bed, their eyes wide with fear. I stood at the foot of the bed, the revolver in my hand feeling like an extension of my anger and betrayal. "Jerry, please," Barb begged, her voice shaking. "You don't have to do this." I looked at her, my heart aching. "Why, Barb? Why did you do this to us? To me?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I was lonely. I made a terrible mistake. Please, let's talk about this." "Talk?" I echoed bitterly. "You want to talk now? After everything?" Bob tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Jerry, listen, we can figure this out. Just put the gun down." I ignored him and focused on Barb. "You know, I used to love gambling," I said, my voice calm. "I gave it up because I loved you more. But tonight, we're going to play a little game of chance." I opened the revolver cylinder and showed them the single bullet. Barb gasped, her face turning pale. "No, Jerry, please," she whispered. I spun the cylinder, the clicking sound echoing in the silence. "Let's see how lucky you really are," I said, pointing the gun at Bob. "Please, Jerry, don't," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "What's the matter, Bob?" I asked coldly. "You were so brave sneaking around with my wife. Where's that bravery now?" He closed his eyes, his body shaking. I pulled the trigger. Snap! The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Bob let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, but his relief was short-lived. I turned the gun on Barb. "Your turn, Barb," I said softly. She sobbed, her body trembling. "Jerry, I love you. Please, don't do this." "Do you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Do you really love me? Because it doesn't feel like it." I pulled the trigger. Snap! Another empty chamber. I could see the fear in Barb's eyes, mixed with a glimmer of hope. Maybe she thought I was bluffing. Maybe she thought I didn't have it in me to really hurt her. I turned back to Bob, my grip tightening on the gun. "Tell me, Bob," I said, my voice icy. "Why do you do it? Why do you prey on married women?" He swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his face. "It's the thrill," he admitted. "The chase, making them feel special, like they're missing out on something." "And my wife?" I asked, feeling a surge of anger. "Did you think she was missing out on something with me?" "Jerry, please," Barb interrupted, her voice desperate. "This isn't helping. Let's just talk." I ignored her and kept my eyes on Bob. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Playing your little games. But this time, the game's on you." I spun the cylinder again and pointed the gun at him. "Ready for another round, Bob?" His eyes widened in terror. "Jerry, no. Please, I have a family. I don't want to die." I smiled coldly. "You should have thought about that before you crawled into bed with my wife." I pulled the trigger. Snap! Another empty chamber. Bob's body sagged with relief, but his eyes were still filled with fear. "Looks like you're lucky tonight," I said, my voice flat. "But luck runs out eventually." I turned back to Barb. "You know, Barb, I really did love you. I would have done anything for you. But you threw it all away for this loser." She sobbed harder, her body shaking. "Jerry, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. Please, let's just talk about this. We can fix it." I shook my head, feeling the weight of my decision. "There's nothing left to fix, Barb. You broke us." I raised the gun and pointed it at my own head. "Maybe it would be easier to just end it all right now. Then you can be free to do whatever you want." "No, Jerry," Barb screamed, trying to break free from the handcuffs. "Please, don't do this." I looked at her, my heart aching with a mixture of love and pain. "It's too late, Barb. The damage is done." I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. Snap! Another empty chamber. I let out a shaky breath and lowered the gun. The room was silent except for Barb's sobs and Bob's ragged breathing. I opened my eyes and looked at them, feeling a strange sense of calm. "This game is over," I said quietly, "but the consequences are just beginning." I walked to the dresser, picked up the handcuff keys, and tossed them onto the bed. "Unlock yourselves and get out of my house. I never want to see either of you again." Barb reached for the keys, her hands shaking. "Jerry, please," she whispered. "I still love you." I shook my head, feeling the tears welling up. "It's over, Barb. We're over." As they fumbled with the keys and freed themselves, I turned and walked out of the room, the revolver still in my hand. The weight of their betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders, but I knew that this was the first step toward taking back control of my life. The room was still and silent after the intense confrontation. Barb and Bob had finally managed to free themselves from the handcuffs. They sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing their sore wrists, avoiding eye contact with each other and with me. The air was thick with unspoken words and raw emotions. I stood by the dresser, my grip on the revolver loosening slightly. The adrenaline rush was fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. I needed answers, some kind of closure. I turned to Bob, my voice calm but cold. "Why, Bob? Why do you do it? What makes you prey on married women?" Bob looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret and fear. He swallowed hard before speaking. It's the thrill, Jerry. The chase. Making them feel special, like they're missing out on something." "And what about my wife?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Did you think she was missing out on something with me?" Bob looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know. She seemed unhappy, lonely. I took advantage of that. I'm sorry." Barb, still crying, looked up at Bob with a mixture of anger and sadness. "You took advantage of me, Bob. I was vulnerable, and you used that against me." I turned to Barb, my heart breaking all over again. "Why, Barb? Why did you let him? Why did you betray me?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, Jerry. I was feeling lost, and Bob made me feel noticed. I know it's no excuse, but that's the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "Do you have any idea how much you've hurt me? How you've destroyed everything we built together?" Barb's sobs grew louder. "I'm so sorry, Jerry. I know I messed up. I don't know how to make it right." "You can't," I said quietly. "You can't undo what's been done." The room fell silent again, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. I looked at Bob, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. "What about your family, Bob? What will they think when they find out what you've done?" He looked up at me, his face pale. "Please, Jerry, don't tell them. I'll do anything. Just don't ruin their lives because of my mistakes." I laughed bitterly. "Ruin their lives? What about mine? What about Barb's? You didn't think about that, did you?" Bob shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I was selfish. I know that now. Please, Jerry, don't punish them for what I did." I felt a surge of anger, but also a flicker of pity. I knew what it felt like to have your world turned upside down. I took a deep breath, trying to find some semblance of calm. "I won't tell them," I said finally. "But you need to leave. Both of you. I can't stand to look at either of you right now." Barb looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Jerry, please, can we at least try to fix this? I still love you." I shook my head, feeling the tears welling up again. "It's too late, Barb. The trust is gone. And without trust, there's nothing left." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Bob stood up, looking defeated. "I'll go," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Jerry. For everything." He walked out of the room, leaving Barb and me alone. The silence was deafening. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, the weight of the night's events finally taking its toll. "Jerry," Barb whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it all back." I looked at her, my heart aching with a mixture of love and pain. So do I, Barb. So do I. I walked to the door, pausing for a moment before stepping out. Goodbye, Barb, I said softly, my voice breaking. Take care of yourself. As I left the room, I felt a sense of finality. Our marriage was over, and there was no going back. But in that moment, I knew it was the only way to start healing and move forward with my life. The sun was rising as I walked out of the bedroom, leaving Barb behind in tears. The house felt empty, the silence almost deafening. I made my way to the kitchen, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the steam rising from the mug. My thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. How could everything have fallen apart so quickly? After what felt like hours, I heard the soft sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Barb standing in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked fragile, broken. "Jerry," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "What's there to talk about, Barb? You betrayed me. You slept with another man." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you, and I don't know how to make it right." I looked at her, my heart aching. "Why, Barb? Why did you do it?" She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was lonely, Jerry. You were always busy with work, and I felt invisible. Bob made me feel noticed, wanted. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I regret it more than anything." I shook my head, feeling the sting of her words. "I was working for us, for our future. I never imagined you felt that way." She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. I know you were doing it for us, and I should have talked to you, told you how I was feeling. But I didn't, and I made the worst mistake of my life." I looked down at my coffee, my mind racing. Could we fix this? Could we ever go back to the way things were? The thought seemed impossible. "Jerry, please," Barb continued, her voice desperate. "I still love you. I want to make this right. Can we at least try?" I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "I don't know, Barb. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have?" She reached out, her hand trembling. "We have our love, Jerry. We've been through so much together. Can't we at least try to rebuild that trust?" I looked at her, seeing the pain and regret in her eyes. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe that we could make it work. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, was screaming that it was too late. "I need time to think," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't make this decision right now." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting." I stood up, feeling the exhaustion in every bone of my body. "I'm going to take a walk. Clear my head." Barb watched me, her eyes filled with hope and fear. "Okay. I'll be here when you get back." I left the house, stepping out into the cool morning air. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets empty. I walked aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Could I forgive Barb? Could we ever rebuild what we had lost? As I walked, I thought about our life together. The good times, the bad times, the moments of joy and the moments of pain. I thought about the love we had shared and the betrayal that had shattered it. By the time I returned home, the sun was high in the sky. I felt a sense of calm, a clarity that had been missing before. I knew what I had to do. Barb was sitting on the couch, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Jerry?" she said softly, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "Barb, I can't promise that things will ever be the same. But I think we owe it to ourselves to try, to see if we can rebuild the trust we've lost." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. "Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for giving us a chance." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision lifting slightly. It wouldn't be easy, and it would take time. But for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. "Let's take it one day at a time," I said quietly, "and see where it leads us." Barb nodded, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "One day at a time," she agreed. And with that, we began the difficult journey of trying to heal and rebuild the life we had once shared. It wouldn't be easy, and there were no guarantees. But for now, it was enough to know that we were both willing to try. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Barb and I were both walking on eggshells, trying to navigate the shattered pieces of our relationship. I moved into the guest bedroom, needing some space to think and heal. Barb respected my need for distance, but every interaction was tinged with sadness and regret. One evening, about a week after the confrontation, I came home from work to find Barb sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red from crying. "Hi, Jerry," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "Sure, Barb. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened. I know I hurt you deeply, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But I want to understand what we need to do to start healing, to try and rebuild our trust." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "It's not going to be easy, Barb. Trust is something that's built over time, and it was shattered in an instant." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But I want to do whatever it takes. I love you, Jerry. I don't want to lose you." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I love you too, Barb. But this isn't just about love. It's about trust and respect. I need to know that you're committed to making things right." She nodded vigorously. "I am, Jerry. I promise I am. I've already made an appointment for us with a marriage counselor. I think it could help us work through this." I was surprised by her proactive approach. "A counselor? Do you really think that will help?" "I do," she replied earnestly. "We need someone to help us communicate better, to work through the pain and rebuild our foundation." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, Barb, I'll go. But this isn't just about talking to a counselor. It's about actions. You need to show me that you're willing to change, to earn back my trust." She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine. "I will, Jerry. I promise." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll see. One day at a time, remember." She smiled, tears in her eyes. One day at a time. The first counseling session was awkward. We sat in the therapist's office, not knowing where to start. Dr. Harris, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, began by asking us to share what brought us there. Barb went first, her voice trembling. "I betrayed Jerry. I had an affair, and it's torn us apart. I regret it deeply and want to make things right." Dr. Harris nodded, turning to me. "And you, Jerry? How do you feel about what happened?" I took a deep breath, feeling the anger and sadness well up inside me. "I feel hurt, betrayed. I thought we had a strong marriage, but now I don't know what to think." Dr. Harris gave us both a compassionate look. Rebuilding trust after a betrayal is one of the hardest things a couple can face. It's going to take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. But if you're both committed to it, there's hope. Barb squeezed my hand, and I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. As the weeks went by, we continued our counseling sessions. We talked about our feelings, our fears, and our hopes for the future. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the pain felt too overwhelming. But each time, Barb was there, willing to fight for us. One evening, after a particularly intense session, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Barb turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. "Jerry, I know this is hard, but I believe in us. I believe we can get through this. Do you? I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. I want to, Barb. I really do. But it's going to take time. We can't rush this. She nodded, a small smile on her lips. I know, and I'm willing to wait, to put in the work, because you're worth it. We're worth it. I reached out and took her hand, feeling the sense of hope for the first time in a long while. One day at a time, I said softly. One day at a time, she echoed. And so we began the slow, painful process of healing. There were no guarantees, but for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what was broken and find our way back to each other. Months had passed since the night everything fell apart. Each day had been a step forward, some tiny, others more significant. The pain of Barb's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer felt like a raw wound. It had started to heal, slowly and painfully, but it was healing nonetheless. Barb and I continued our counseling sessions with Dr. Harris. We talked, we cried, we argued. And through it all, we began to understand each other better. The trust was being rebuilt, one brick at a time. One Saturday morning, as I sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, Barb joined me with 2 cups of coffee. She set one down in front of me and took a seat. "Good morning," she said with a tentative smile. "Good morning," I replied, returning her smile. "Do you have any plans for today?" she asked, taking a sip of her coffee. I shrugged. I was thinking about going for a walk in the park. Clear my head a bit. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, that sounds nice." We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, and then headed out to the park. The air was crisp, and the trees were beginning to show the first hints of autumn colors. We walked side by side, our hands occasionally brushing against each other. After a while, Barb spoke up. "Jerry, I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future. I know it's been hard, and I'm so grateful that you've given us a chance to try and fix things." I glanced at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "It hasn't been easy, Barb, but I think we're making progress." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I feel the same way, and I want you to know that I'm committed to us, to rebuilding our trust and making our marriage stronger." "I believe you," I said quietly, "but we still have a long way to go." "I know," she replied, her voice soft, "but I'm willing to take it one step at a time, with you." We continued our walk, enjoying the peacefulness of the park. As we rounded a bend, we came across a small playground. Children were laughing and playing, their joy infectious. We watched them for a moment, and then Barb turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Jerry, do you ever think about what it would be like to have kids?" she asked softly. The question took me by surprise. We had talked about starting a family before everything fell apart, but it had been put on hold after the affair. "Sometimes," I admitted. "I used to think about it a lot, but after everything that happened, I wasn't sure if it was still possible for us." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I think it could be, Jerry. Maybe not right away, but someday. I still want that with you." I looked at her, feeling the surge of hope. "I want that too, Barb. But first, we need to make sure we're strong enough to handle it." "We will be," she said with determination. "One day at a time. Right?" I smiled, squeezing her hand in return. One day at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Barb and I continued to rebuild our relationship. We focused on communication, on being honest with each other, and on making time for us. It wasn't always easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but we faced them together. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Barb turned to me with a serious expression. "Jerry, there's something I need to tell you," she said. I felt a pang of anxiety, but nodded for her to continue. "I've been offered a promotion at work," she said. "It's a great opportunity, but it would mean more travel, more time away from home. I took a deep breath, considering her words. Do you want to take it? She looked down at her hands, then back at me. I do, but I'm worried about what it would mean for us. We've come so far, and I don't want to jeopardize that. I reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Barb, I want you to follow your dreams. We'll figure out a way to make it work. We've already been through so much. I think we can handle this too. She smiled, relief washing over her face. Thank you, Jerry. I needed to hear that. And we'll make sure to stay connected, I added. Video calls, visits whenever possible. We'll make it work. She leaned in and kissed me, a gesture filled with love and gratitude. I love you, Jerry. I love you too, Barb, I replied. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace and hope for the future. We had faced the worst and come out stronger. There were still challenges ahead, but I knew we could face them together. One day at a time, we were moving on, rebuilding our life and our love. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly hopeful about the future.